Hello YouTubers, this is Dennis from Canoehound Adventures, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about prolonged survival when you're on a canoe trip or a kayak trip. Stay tuned. So welcome back. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join me for this video. Recently I've been invited by a group of YouTubers, a bunch of creators who have different skill sets, everything from bushcrafting and paddling and hunting and fishing, and they created a group called A Community Outdoors, and this video is my contribution towards their goal of informing and teaching people how to survive in nature. You know, you take a look around me right now. I'm currently up north on a lake called Bottom Lake, and I'm on a one-day paddling excursion. I'm out here, well basically I was out here camping with the family, and I decided to break away for a day just to do a few things, shoot a couple of videos, and to talk to you people about prolonged survival when you're on a canoe trip or a kayaking trip. For those of you who have been on canoe trips, you know that the weather plays a huge factor in everything. You know, whether you're having the wind at your back so you have a nice smooth paddle, or if you're paddling into a headwind and you're fighting the wind all day, you know, rainstorms and hail, and you know, Mother Nature could throw you a bunch of different curveballs for sure when you're out here. But what happens if you get yourself into a situation where you're stranded? Let me throw you a scenario. Okay, you're on a 7-day canoe trip, and you're halfway through the trip, and you're shooting whitewater, and your canoe happens to wrap around a rock, and you get the biggest hole, tear in your canoe, and you're kind of stranded. You know, you've got all your gear, you're fortunate enough to have all your gear, and you've got it up on shore. And what do you do in that situation? You could be in a very remote area where there's not a lot of people to be there to rescue you. So you have to think about these things when you're planning your trip, to make sure that if you do run into a scenario like this, that you're actually backed up. Okay, there are systems out there on the market. One is called Spot. Basically what it is a satellite beacon where you can actually send messages to your loved ones and let them know that you're okay. And you could also ask for help. Okay, in a situation like that, you might want to hit that button on there to say, hey, come and rescue me because I'm stranded, or we have an injury, or you know, heart attack or a death. You never know. When you're out in these situations and there's not a lot of people around, you have to really plan for the worst and hope for the best. So when I plan a trip, a 7-day trip or a 5-day trip, or even for this trip here, which is a single overnighter, I've departed from my family and friends. They're camped on another lake, and they are quite comfortable, and they've got the coolers of food, and they've got the music, and they've got the sleeping accommodations. On this trip, I've chosen to go minimalist. Okay, bring as little equipment as I can, just to spend a night out in the wilderness. I've come to this lake, and this lake is basically as you see behind me, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a weed choke lake, so the fishing's not going to be that great, I don't think. I don't know, I haven't done it yet. But I'm not here to fish. I'm just here basically to spend a night and get a little solitude and enjoy myself. But even in this situation where I am quite literally a 2-hour paddle from my camp, probably even closer to help if I needed it. I do have my cell phone with me, and I do have basic coverage here, or minimal coverage here. So if something happened, I would probably be able to reach the authorities. But what happens in the case where I am here, I've been fighting a headwind all day. What happens if I run into a situation where I've got headwinds or whitecaps on the water, and it's just totally unsafe to travel? Basically, with my knowledge and my experience of many years of canoeing, I'm going to stay put. I'm not going to endanger my life being by myself and take that chance at something happening, injury or death. There's a lot of things that can happen, and I wouldn't want to put my family through that. So even on a small trip like this, I basically planned my trip around being here one day, but I've also given myself some extra provisions. What am I talking about there? Okay, so I've got my sleeping accommodation, which is going to be a tarp. I'm going to just set up a simple tarp setup. I have a sleeping bag for warmth and sleeping. I have a head net to keep the mosquitoes off of me. I do have a cooking pot set. These are all things you're going to have on a canoe trip or a kayak trip. But the one thing that you really have to consider is food. Okay, you're out in the wilderness, and yeah, if you know your food, there's a lot of things you can forage for. Right now happens to be blueberry season up here. I've been nibbling on blueberries at every stop I've made, and that's always good. But you can't just survive on blueberries. Maybe you can, but I don't think you can just survive on blueberries. And I'm not the biggest forager when it comes to knowing exactly what I can and cannot eat out in the wild. But I come prepared. I come prepared that, in this case, you never know, I could end up having to spend an extra night here because of inclement weather or whatever situation, you know what I mean? So essentially, I've got, for tonight's meal, I've got an MRE, okay? And this here has basically, for like the U.S. Army, it has all the nutrients of food or meals that you're going to need. There's a main course, and there's usually like desserts in there and a candy or stuff like that. I'm just going to eat what I feel comfortable with, and if I'm full, I'm not going to continue to eat. So if there's, say for instance, I don't know, a package of pretzels in there, or a granola bar, or whatever else might be in there to enjoy with a meal, I'm going to put that aside, because one, what happens if I get stranded? Okay, then I'll have something else to give me an energy boost at a later point. I've got fishing gear with me, so I hopefully will be able to catch fish and have food that way. But I've also brought myself other items, and I've got enough food here to last me an extra day. I've got 3 packages of oatmeal, a package of cookies, and a package of Pop-Tarts, of all things, and some trail mix. Okay, there's a lot of nutrients. There's enough stuff here that'll keep me going for an extra day or two. But the one thing I did stash away also in my stove pack, because I had the ability to do so, was an extra dinner. Okay, you do not know how long you could end up being stranded for, so it's very important to carry with you extra food. If you're planning a 7-day trip and you're also planning on fishing and foraging for food, still bring food for the 7 full days, and it could not hurt to carry yourself an extra day's meal. Okay, at least 1 extra day's meal for each person within the group. I got a mosquito buzzing around here. So in this case, I brought myself, and it's very cheap and inexpensive and super light. I've got a cheddar chipotle sidekicks meal by Knorr. This is something that, had I needed to stay around here on an extra night, I have food. Okay, the other things that you're going to need too in a situation, and you should already have these if you're camping or setting up for a campsite or a camping trip, or it could be hiking, it could be a biking trip, it could be anything that's wilderness related. Make sure you got enough food. But in most cases, you're still going to be carrying your sleeping accommodations, whether it's a tent, it could be a tarp, it could be a hammock setup, you could be in a camper, who knows? Whatever the situation is, you have accommodation. If you don't have accommodation, let's say, for instance, you tip over your canoe or kayak and you're in a river and everything is lost. Everything is lost. First thing you're going to want to do is get up on shore and create yourself some sort of shelter and a fire pit, and then you're going to start to see what you're familiar with in the area to be able to feed yourself. Without energy and food, you don't know what could happen. Okay, you can die, you can become very weak. You need food and you need calories to keep yourself going. So I don't know if you're getting the common theme of what I'm talking about here. You're gonna want food, okay? Water, as you can see, there's water all around me. If you haven't got a filtration system, you could still drink the water, okay? If it's a situation like this, best to filter it, but if you don't have that opportunity, you still do have water. But the most important thing is having food, okay? So make sure in a prolonged survival situation, whether you think it's going to happen or not, because how many people do you know that have always thought that it's not going to happen to me, okay? And I can give you one case and example. This is a true story. Many years ago, I took my wife and my 2 daughters on a camping trip up in the Temagami area. We had a great trip. We went in and it was about a 5-day, I think, 5 or 6 day trip. And on our way out, we actually run into very high winds. They were headwinds, and it was like impassable. Okay, I was traveling with like a 6-year-old, and I think my oldest daughter was probably around 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old. And my wife and my oldest daughter were in kayaks, which we had strapped together, so we had sort of a pontoon setup. And my youngest daughter was in the canoe with me, and we also had our dog, and we could not battle the wind. We could not battle the wind. Nobody on the lake that was going by with boat was kind enough to offer us any assistance. So what we did was we seen an island off in the distance, and we worked ourselves really hard to get there. And we had hoped that we would get there and maybe have a lunch or a dinner or something, and things would clear up. But they did not. If anything, it got worse. A big storm come in, and quite literally, I was with my wife and daughters, and we were stranded on an island. But the good thing about it was we had shelter. Okay, we still had our canoes, and we had extra food. We had extra food, so the girls were well fed, and I was well fed, and the wife was well fed, and our energy and our spirits remained up. We stayed up, and a lot of times food has a lot to do with your mental state. So making sure you have a lot of food on your trip is very, very essential. So I could just ramble on and on about this, but I think I've got my point across. If you want to survive in the wilderness for a prolonged period of time, it's always better to have more food than not enough when you're on a trip. So keep that in mind whenever you're getting ready to travel, hiking, biking, canoeing, kayaking, whatever it is in the outdoors where you're away for a prolonged period of time, make sure you have the calories. So I'd just like to thank the guys from Community Outdoors for actually inviting me to be part of season 2. It is an honor that you guys would actually consider having me in here, and the shout out goes to all of you, okay? Right off the top of my head, I couldn't list you all, so I'm not going to list 1 or 2. I just say thank you guys, I really appreciate it, and I hope this video serves well. And for you people out there that are watching this video, please do a search for Community Outdoors and watch the other videos, okay? Season 1 and Season 2, and believe me, you're gonna learn something. It's very entertaining, and you're gonna enjoy it, okay? So this is Dennis from Canoehound Adventures saying, everybody, remember, keep the adventures alive.